In a massive drone strike against an airfield, Ukraine very likely damages a number of Sukhoi 34 fighter bombers that are the most responsible for the glide bomb attacks. Also, at the same time, the peace conference in Switzerland is kicking off while Putin offered to negotiate a ceasefire, which is more or less a demand for the Ukrainian capitulation. But we'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front line in the situation report about the war in Ukraine. Russia's attacks against the Ukrainian territory continues daily. They most of the time they include ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. The Ukrainians on their side are striking back, and they've hit the Morozovsk, Morozovsk airfield with a massive drone strike. The Russians themselves confirmed that they shot down 70 drones. Now, that doesn't mean they shot down 70, but at the very least, that shows the size of the attack of this drone strike. And that attack has been successful, as we can see on satellite pictures. Now, there are two showing us here several Russian fighter bombers here. Those should be Sukhoi 34s. We see 5 of them here, and afterwards we see burn marks, and we see a hangar next to it, or a cover next to it being damaged, and under it we see the shape of 2 more planes. Now this here would indicate that strikes have hit here, but we don't see wreckage. At least I cannot identify clear wreckage at that point, so the planes there might have been removed before they have been hit. They might have been hit also, but at least that's no proof. But what we do see is that a strike has hit this cover here, this white building, and under it were planes at the same time, so that they took damage is more than likely. It's almost certain. The extent of the damage obviously cannot be judged from this. We do not see that they have burned down, so it might be light, it might be a complete write-off. That's simply no way to judge, especially from satellite pictures at this resolution. Also, in recent strikes against the Crimean Peninsula, we have fresh evidence that they were successful. Here we have an S-400 battery not far away from Sevastopol, and the day after it looked like this, and we see significant damage. Among the items destroyed was the radar system, the most expensive part of the S-400 battery. So the Ukrainian strikes against the Russian air defense systems are continuing, and they are continuing to do damage, which will obviously in the long run help Ukraine with its F-16s once they enter the battlefield. On the northern front, we have reports from Sumy. Here, the border troops, the Ukrainians, are saying that the Russian activity has been reduced. So right now, it doesn't seem to be that there's any serious threat of a cross-border invasion anymore. And on the east of it, where the Russians have entered, the Ukrainian counterattacks are continuing. Here at Liboke, we have the Ukrainians reaching this. So we have a fresh, likely advance by the Ukrainians reaching to this point. As you can see, it's not crazy much. It's like 300-400 meters that they have advanced in this area. To the east, in Vovchansk, as you can see on the map right now, there are claims that the troops here are encircled. Others confirm it, some deny it. It seems to be, at least the claims are, that in between there is a gap that is currently a contested area, which would mean that the Ukrainians are not in this place. They have not encircled those troops here and are in the process of wiping them out. And as we can see, it's a distance of 150 meters. So we are quite a long way away from a supposed encirclement and destruction of forces in here. The Russians are claiming that they are currently supplying them with drones, so they might be able to hold out. They might also be destroyed in the near future. We'll obviously try to see what is going on there and report it in future situation reports. So if you don't want to miss them, subscribe to the channel. Let's switch to the Eastern Front, because here in the north I have nothing new to report. And on the Eastern Front, we have a Russian advance at Berestove. Here, down here, the Russians have advanced roughly up to here. We also have a fresh geolocalization here. As you can see, they have been spotted at this point, which should be more or less here on the map. So another advance by roughly 500 meters to the west in the direction of Jane. That was it here. There are some claims by the Ukrainians that the Russians have withdrawn here in the Serebryansk forest. The Ukrainians are claiming this. I have not seen evidence of this, so might be true, might not be true, unclear. Bilohorivka, also unclear whether the Russians have actually entered the chalk quarry or not. There were claims in this regard, but I have not seen proof of this. So the situation here seems to be more or less unchanged, at least for now. But we do have some change here in the direction of Rostolivka. I'm not completely wrong. Yes, in Rostolivka. Here we have the Russians advancing to the border of the town, and they actually have not just advanced up to here, they also captured several areas this here, so they gained sizable amount of territory over the last few days. We have here them right at the outskirts of the town and to its east itself. So we see that the Russians have now come to here and to here. Whether they have fully entered the town of Rostolivka itself doesn't seem to be the case, but we see them advancing. Just recently, the front line was somewhat roughly a kilometer further south, so we have additional Russian advance confirmed at this point. At Chasiv Yar is the next change in territory. Here, the Russians have cleared this area between Bodanivka and between Chasiv Yar. It was probably no longer occupied by the Ukrainians, as they have been more or less, or as they would have been more or less encircled in this area. But now it's confirmed that it's controlled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians are claiming that the Russians withdrew from Klishivka. I've shown you a couple of situation reports ago that they have been geolocalized in here in the center of the town. So we knew they were at least in control of this part of Klishivka. Now the Ukrainians claim that they have withdrawn. I have not seen conclusive evidence of this, so it might be true, it might not be true. That was it from this region here. We switch over to the Avdiivka area, and here we have bad news, more bad news for Ukraine. Novopokrovsk is now confirmed as having fallen into Russian hands. We have it here. That the Russians actually raised the flag at the westernmost part of the town, confirming full control over it. And the Russians also advanced further south of it. As you can see here, we have them at the here in this region, directly south of it, and we have them advancing towards the next town already. Those are on the map here. This was roughly here, I think. And here's the next advance. So we see them pushing in roughly along this line here, which would then again indicate that this should be probably straightened out fairly soon, as it's too risky for the Ukrainians to stay in here for much longer. I would expect a withdrawal of everything that's in here. So within the next week, the front line will probably be more or less like this. So additional losses for the Ukrainians here, and they have lost another town in the area of Avdiivka. Further south, we have the Russians advancing in the area north of Netailove. They have gained some, those two, if I've seen it correctly, those two tree lines here. So they gained additional ground in the direction of Yasnoborodivka. This now is getting increasingly under pressure from both the north and the south, and obviously the east. So the fighting there will intensify, and we'll have to see how long the Ukrainians will be able to hold out there as well. Further south, the Russians have re-entered Nevelske. They had, I think, even captured it completely a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. A Ukrainian counterattack drove them out of Nevelske again. But now we have confirmation that they have re-entered it in fresh visual evidence that they are in the southern part, solidly in the center of it, have re-established themselves, as you can see here on the pro-Ukraine state map. Further south, at Krasnohorivka, we have a tiny Russian advance. Here is the roundabout, and they have entered those houses here. That's now being confirmed. As you can see here, they have entered in this high-rise here, right north of the roundabout, and gained some additional ground in this area as well. Further south, they have advanced quite significantly, actually, over the last few days. Hierhivka has fallen completely into Russian hands, and they have advanced into Maksimilanivka. We have visual evidence of this as well. As you can see here, they are south of Hierhivka, have advanced. They are in the center of Georgivka and at the very outermost, easternmost houses of Maximilianivka. They have now entered it as well, confirming, if they're already here, that Georgivka has fallen completely into Russian hands, and the Russians gained some ground in the tree line south of it as well. Further south, I cannot confirm any change in this area. Nothing south of Velika Novosilka, and in the region of Orikhiv, we have a tiny advance close to Mirne. Here, the Russians have advanced. We have localization. They have advanced in this tree line here, which should be this. They have advanced somewhat in this direction. There was a Ukrainian counterattack afterwards, which supposedly put them back somewhat. I am not fully able to confirm what the front line is there now, but we know they have advanced up until here at some point, at least over the last few days. No change south of Orikhiv directly, no change along the Dnipro that I can confirm at the very least. That was it here. From the front line itself, from the Crimean Peninsula, we have some news as well, which shows us visual evidence that the Russians are placing barges in front of the bridges, a clear sign that they want to block Ukrainian naval drones with it in case of an attack. Crimean. Generally, in the overall situation, we have Putin now claiming that 700,000 men are in the war area. Usually includes, according to what he says, it includes the rear areas as well. So it should include Belgorod, Kursk, Bryansk, and probably Voronezh, Rostov-on-Don, and probably Krasnodar. So all the area that is involved in the fighting and in the support of it. He now claims 700,000. In December, he still said 613,000. So supposedly the number has risen by almost 90,000. Ukraine said in May, so just a month ago, that 515,000 Russian soldiers are inside of Ukraine. But as said, they are only talking about Ukraine's territory, not the supporting areas around that. And we have news from the Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine, Garlyuk. He said the difference in artillery has shrunk from 1 to 7 to 1 to 5. So while the Russians still have a 5-time superiority, they only have a 5-time superiority now, down from 1 to 7. In the past, we even heard 1 to 10. So the deliveries of fresh ammunition, it is showing along the front line, even though we also have to say it's not showing enough. Troop generation, we have news. Sri Lanka said that Russia has agreed to stop recruiting its citizens. We talked about it in the last situation report, how many Sri Lankans had been recruited, supposedly the number of a full battalion already. So Russia said they're going to stop it. And we have news from Russia that the financial incentives for volunteers are rising massively. In Karachay-Cherkasy, supposedly they are promised a one-time payment of 1 million rubles. That should be something like 14 to 15,000 euros or dollars. In the past, it only had been 200 to 300. So 1.3 million now in regards to 200 to 300,000 a while ago. The same is being told from other oblasts as well. Several of them are confirmed to have reached over 100,000 at this point as well. I'm deeply sorry, I just got a phone call, so I had to pause. So I don't actually know what I said before, and I don't have time for editing. So in case I haven't said it yet, several other oblasts also are now offering more than 1 million in one-time payments, and that is a clear sign that it's getting more difficult to recruit volunteers. That doesn't mean that the Russian volunteer recruitment will stop. We already talked about it in the past, that they increasingly try to find foreigners to fight for them, and they are increasingly successful with this. But it clearly shows that the pool of available volunteers in Russia is getting smaller. They have to pay more and more, and this at the same time will obviously put pressure on the Russian finances as well. Then we have South Korea saying that North Korea could by now have delivered 4.8 million shells to Russia. This is in comparison to what the West has delivered, is obviously a drastic difference. In addition to that, several dozen ballistic missiles were likely delivered towards Russia. And according to South Korea, Russia is giving back tanks and planes, as well as technology for spy satellites. Tanks was a big surprise for me, because they should need every tank they can get, but it might be 2 or 3 for the North Koreans to copy. That could be theoretically an explanation, as I would not expect Russia to have tanks to spare in sizable numbers. I simply don't see how they would be able to give North Korea 200 T-90s or something like this. But then for reverse engineering, 1 or 2 or 3 might be plenty for the North Koreans to improve their own. Planes make sense. This is probably the most dire need of the North Koreans, as they have been able to improve their tank fleet. They are able to build their ballistic missiles. They are able to design and build own air defense systems. No clue how effective those are, but where they are completely overwhelmed is the production of own planes. So this would be the most dire need. I mean, they still have MiG-15 in trainer roles, and their frontline fighters are still including MiG-19. So we are talking about really ancient planes. The most modern version is a decades-old MiG-29, and of those they only have a couple. So this was the most likely help that North Korea can expect in this regard, and according to South Korea, they have received such. Now let's switch over to the political sphere. The US have implemented new sanctions, including against the Moscow Stock Exchange, and there were reports that the difficulties and that it actually led to some results in Russia. There were reports about panic buying of euro and US dollars in Russia in cash, supposedly with up to 100% in increased prices. So those who wanted dollars in cash had to pay twice as much as the official exchange rates, and still there were lines being building up, showing a increasing distrust in the Russian financial system and thus in the Russian government in this regard. If those are true, I also read the contrary, that supposedly it's not true, but it seems more likely that it happened from the news that I found from the reliability of sources. Putin has said that he's willing to negotiate a peace agreement and a ceasefire. And the interesting part is, if we look at the wording, he's willing to start negotiations for this. And as a precondition for this, he demands that Ukraine withdraws from the annexed territory. This is right now only controlled at 75%. So he demands that Ukraine withdraws from Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and the small parts of Luhansk that are currently not occupied by Russia. Only after that will there be a negotiation. And this would obviously require Ukraine to give up territory that is currently fortified. That the Russians are not advancing faster in the areas is because of the Ukrainian fortifications, as they allow the weaker Ukrainian forces to hold the Russians back. In case they would give that up, they would not only hand over Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, two of their big cities, and for instance here Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, they would also hand over most of the fortified territory, and they would even give up the right bank of the Dnipro, which is currently protecting the whole of the southwest of Ukraine, including their last naval harbors, including Odessa. So this is completely unacceptable if it doesn't at the very least lead to a conclusive peace afterwards. And here comes the next thing. Then only he wants to start negotiations. And in the past, part of the negotiations, parts of the demand for the Ukrainians was that Russia had towards the Ukrainians was that their armed forces have to be reduced to 85,000 soldiers, and they are not allowed to enter an alliance, and they are not allowed to buy weapons abroad. So this would be a glorified police unit in uniform, completely indefensive, completely incapable of defending against future Russian aggressions. And at the same time, if this is then demanded after a Ukrainian withdrawal, then obviously, if the Ukrainians say no, the Russians would resume their offensive, just with the difference that then the Ukrainians don't have fortifications anymore, that then they are not on the other side of the Dnipro anymore. So it's completely unacceptable. It would be a capitulation from the Ukrainian side and an acceptance of subjugation to demand a withdrawal prior to any negotiations. This is I think tantamount is the word, a Ukrainian capitulation. At the same time, the peace conference, and he also demanded that the sanctions would be lifted and the conquests would have to be internationally recognized. Both is obviously out of the question in this context where Russia is the aggressor and has had a successful war of conquest. Then at the same time, the peace conference is starting. 92 countries are there. Going through that list are some minor surprises who came at that point. But and the good thing, I guess, is that India is still there. Yeah. But the problem is they're not coming with the head of state, just with a minister. But according to this, it's not an observer. So that's, I guess, a fairly good success. That China is not there is obviously making the whole conference somewhat questionable, as China is the country that has the most influence on Russia in this regard, and it's probably the only country that has a reasonable chance of being able to put up pressure towards Russia to stop this whole war. There's some decentish good news, I guess, that we have, that we see that the Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates, and South Africa have been there, as well as Brazil, but they all are just as observers, which means they want to be there and make connections, but they are not going to sign up on this. And with Brazil, we obviously have one of the big nations that is left that has not really chosen a side. They don't want to do it either. South Africa as part of the BRICS, Indonesia and UAE as big economic powerhouses with big influence, also not there as a participant, just as an observer. So the success that can be expected there is fairly limited, at least to my understanding. It seems like the most likely outcome is that Ukraine will just more or less confirm what Ukraine wanted, maybe with some small nods towards an increased position of the Russian-speaking Ukrainians or something like this, but that this comes to a conclusion that forces Russia to accept a peace deal doesn't seem to make sense. Main goal is probably, if I'm not misunderstanding it, which is possible, the main goal seems to be, to me, that there's a united front towards Russia where the rest of the world says, we support Ukraine in this, so you better make peace under this situation. But without China, that's already a failure. And with only 92 countries, meaning that only half of the world does even participate, that's another disadvantage, another bad result in this regard. So I guess it's for political reasons, it'll be good enough to show the world that Ukraine is interested in making peace, and probably in the end they will show that they're willing to do some compromises, but overall should not expect that this leads to anything that will be signed anytime soon, so that the war is continued. And this is the most likely outcome. The reason for that is also what we have here. There's a survey by the Carnegie Endowment, and they ask in Ukraine in March how the people think about war. 73% of the Ukrainians believe that in the end they will have liberated their whole country. 73%. A sizable percentage also believe that Ukraine will regain some of it or all of their territory, and that was 56%, and that that the war will end within just 2 years. In total, we have other informations are other results are 51% of the Ukrainians want to fight to the 1991 borders, 28% seek a negotiated compromise, and 12% want to liberate until the 2020 line. So in total, we see that the vast majority is still in favor of continuing the war and not giving in, not accepting a settlement, and not accept a current front line or even giving up more. Even when it comes to just holding the current line, only 8% are in favor of. So the vast majority is for the continuation of the war, and without either side reaching a point that peace is even a bad peace. It's preferable towards a quotation good war is preferable towards fighting on. The war will continue. At least one side has to come to the conclusion that peace is better than continuing, and neither side is at that point at this very moment. And when it comes to Russia's peace offers, 91% believe that Russia's peace proposals are are just to allow Russia to gain a breather for the next attack, and only 5% believe that Russia is genuine, that they want peace. All of this shows a clear support in the Ukrainian public to continue the war at this point, as sad as the result might be. International support, there are some good news though. The Ukraine is receiving 50 billion US dollars in credit, and it's going to be secured by the profits of the frozen Russian money. Which in the end will mean that either Ukraine will not pay it back or Russia will pay it back. So I guess a very good result for Ukraine, and it will also allow them to buy more weapons if needed. They also signed a security agreement with Japan and US. But we have to say at this point now, while we have a huge number and a growing number of security agreements, they are more a declaration of intent. We don't even see them being ratified by parliaments, so those are not really ratified contracts between nations. This is more or less governments signing something, we want to help you, and a governmental change can mean that this is going to be continued. It can also mean that it stops immediately. So a long-time security for Ukraine is not achieved with this. There's the declaration of intent for a long time, but not the guarantee. This is unfortunately. Still, though, the Ukrainians are gaining additional ammunition as well. The Dutch have bought 152 shells. That's the Soviet big caliber for 350 million euros. That should probably be close to 100,000 rounds. In that ballpark, maybe 80,000, maybe 120,000, but it should be more or less 120,000 rounds if I haven't calculated. So I guess good news from Netherlands. And the Ukrainian National Defense Company is building a maintenance center in Ukraine for the US delivered US armored vehicles with the US help. That's another good thing. So the maintenance and thus the readiness of the units of the equipment will increase in the future. And finally, Lithuania has promised another 14 M113s. Not a big number, but also not a big country. So additional help coming there as well. And finally, we have something in direct connection, but not outside of the war zone. We have something from Yerevan, from Armenia. There, Pashinyan said in question and answer in parliament that Armenia will leave the CSTO at a later point. And so he basically said it publicly now that we will leave the CSTO, but he hasn't done it officially yet. Reason for that is obvious. Not only does Armenia accuse Belarusia to have helped Azerbaijan in the 2020 war against Nagorno-Karabakh, where big parts of it were conquered and the rest was supposedly secured by Russian peacekeepers. Those peacekeepers didn't protect it when Azerbaijan attacked last year, and at the same time Azerbaijan entered Armenian territory, Armenia itself, in September 2023, and Armenia asked for military aid from the CSTO, which in principle should not have covered Nagorno-Karabakh, but should cover the internationally recognized borders of Armenia, and the CSTO refused to help. They simply didn't help. The reason for that, obviously, that Russia was simply not capable of helping, as their troops are engaged in Ukraine. So this is the reason why they are losing their ally, at least seems like this right now, that they're losing their ally in the south of the Caucasus, as Armenia has learned that being Russia's alliance does not help them if they're getting attacked. That was it from me for now. If you enjoyed this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you think that I made a mistake, for instance, with the conference. I'm well aware that I might have been wrong at this point. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. I really appreciate it, and it helps me run the channel, which is limited successful at this point. As you know, I'm not focused on doing only positive reporting, and that could obviously lead to bigger success, but you can also help me and send me your regards by sending me books, like in this time additional viewers have done. We have, for instance, The Gates of Europe, A History of Ukraine, that was sent to me from Robert A. Smith. This book will show you just how wrong present-day Russia is about historic claims over Ukraine. Thanks for the great videos. Thank you for the book. Thank you so much. And I want to thank the Tola Munro from Wales. Enjoy your gift. Appreciate all you do. You can diss Sullivan by lay off of Biden. Okay. Age of Ambition from Evan Osnos. Chasing Fortune, Truth, and Faith in the New China. Thank you for this book. Xi Jinping, Inside the Mind of Xi Jinping from François Bougon is from Beanbag. Thank you for your regular updates on the Russia-Ukraine war. Thank you for sending me this book. And I have to thank Matthias. Thank you for War in the Modern Great Power System, 1495 to 1975. Thank you so much. And an anonymous donor has sent me Formosa Betrayed from George H. Kerr. Thank you so much. I love books, and it was one of the biggest regret and almost the only regret of emigrating from Germany, that I had to give up my library. So having viewers to help me build a new library is amazing. So thank you so much. If you want to help me with the channel, want to show your support, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much. You also find the Amazon wish list in there in case you also want to send me books, even though I'm honestly don't have the time to read them right now, but I will in the future, and I will have to thank you. So that was it from me for now. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.